I stood frozen, staring at the smoldering remnants of my photo in their fireplace. It was my family's memory, my life, reduced to ash. The warmth of their betrayal still lingered in the room, the same warmth I had once shared with them. The next day, I placed the eviction notice on their door. The same hands that once held me in their arms now sought to erase me. They burned my past. Now I was reclaiming my future. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me the story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Lorraine opened the fireplace flue, and a rush of cold air filled the room, stirring the thin layer of ash that had settled on the hearth. She squinted into the blackened space, searching for remnants of the fire that had consumed the house's warmth days before. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over the cold metal handle, but she didn't stop. She had to see it. Pulling out a piece of crumpled, charred paper, she let out a shallow breath. It was a photograph, barely recognizable, its edges singed and curling. The image was from her 65th birthday, a moment she had tried so hard to keep alive in her memory. Her face, once vibrant and full of life, was now half erased by the flames, the fire licking away the edges of her smile. The sharp burn marks were still warm to the touch, as though the embers had only just retreated from the paper's fragile surface. Lorraine held the photo in her palm, gazing at it without any emotion, not even the sting of tears. The warmth from the paper seeped into her skin, but her eyes remained dry, as they had been for days. She didn't cry anymore, not over this, not over what the fire had taken. She snapped a photo of it with her phone, the image of the ruined photograph now immortalized in pixels. She saved it quickly, her finger lingering on the screen just a moment too long before pulling away. That was it. The photo of a memory reduced to ash, preserved in a new form. Maybe that was all it could ever be now, a frozen image of a past that was slipping further and further from her grasp. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Fire already going?" Lorraine didn't flinch. She turned slowly to face Dana, who stood in the doorway with a look of quiet curiosity, her eyes taking in the room, the fire that had not yet been lit, the silence that hung between them. "No," Lorraine replied, her voice even. "Not yet." Dana smiled faintly, her gaze lingering for a beat longer than usual before she nodded, seemingly understanding without asking. She stepped past Lorraine, offering a small, unspoken gesture of peace as she made her way to her room. Lorraine stood still, her gaze returning to the half-burned photo in her hand. The house had become a collection of empty spaces, each room echoing the absence of those who used to fill it. The laughter, the chatter, the little messes of life, they were gone. All that remained were the rooms themselves, hollow and uninviting. Even the fireplace, now an open wound in the floor, seemed to reflect the same emptiness. Dana didn't ask about the photograph. Dana didn't need to. She knew better than anyone that there were some things you couldn't bring up, things that couldn't be fixed with words. Lorraine had never been good at asking for help, but Dana had learned to be patient. As the silence stretched between them, Lorraine looked back at the empty space above the mantel, where a photograph of her family had once stood proudly. Now it was gone, just like everything else. She felt a coldness creep in, like the last bits of warmth had drained out of her. But it wasn't just the house that felt empty. It was her, too. She stood there, staring at the spot where her family used to be, trying to convince herself that something, anything might still be there. But no, it was all gone. She had already lost so much. Turning away, she walked slowly to her room, the photo still clutched in her hand, the cool air following her. The house seemed to close in around her, its silence deafening. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on her chest. She reached her door and paused, her fingers hovering over the handle. The stillness in the house was suffocating. She wasn't sure what she was looking for anymore. Some comfort, maybe, or a glimpse of something that might help her make sense of the emptiness. And just as she was about to push the door open, a sharp sound echoed through the hallway. A sudden crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of frantic footsteps. "Mom!" Lorraine froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned quickly, the photo still gripped tightly in her hand. But it wasn't Dana's voice. It wasn't the soft, measured tone that Lorraine had come to know over the years. It was something else, something urgent, something raw. Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world outside the house seemed to slip away. Whatever was coming next, whatever was about to happen, would change everything. The coffee shop had a steady hum, the soft chatter of voices blending with the clink of ceramic mugs and the hiss of steam from the espresso machine. It wasn't the kind of place Lorraine would have chosen a few months ago, not when her life still felt whole, still held together by things she didn't fully appreciate at the time. Now, though, it was the quietest corner she could find, the farthest she could get from the echoes of her empty house. Patrick and Arden were already there when she arrived, sitting at the corner table by the window. Patrick had his usual careful expression, his sharp eyes scanning through a folder as though the rest of the world was secondary to whatever he was reviewing. Arden was leaning back, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the door as though she was waiting for someone else to show up. "Good to see you," Patrick said, looking up briefly as Lorraine sat down across from them. His voice was businesslike, but there was a small crack in it, something that showed he knew this wasn't just another meeting. Lorraine didn't respond immediately, just set the envelope on the table between them, a quiet weight settling with it. She didn't need to speak. Her actions already said everything she needed them to. Slowly, she opened the flap and pulled out the documents, sliding them toward Patrick. Patrick took the papers in his hands, his eyes scanning the words as he read the first few lines. The weight of the moment pressed in on Lorraine's chest. The air in the coffee shop felt thicker now, almost suffocating. She wasn't sure what she expected him to say, but she didn't need him to say anything. Not yet. When he finished reading, he placed the documents back on the table, his fingers lingering over the top. "This is it," he said quietly. "The down payment gift, $90K. Lorraine nodded, her eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, the world moved on, oblivious. "Yes, that's the one. They don't know about it," Arden finally spoke, her voice smooth, almost casual. "They think you're just a guest." Lorraine's lips pressed into a tight line as she nodded again, the bitter taste of the words settling on her tongue. "They do. They think I'm just a guest." She let the words linger for a moment, tasting their weight. "They're wrong, but they'll find out soon enough." Patrick set the papers down, his gaze shifting between Lorraine and Arden, as if assessing whether this was the right moment to push forward. "You know what this means," he said, his voice low, careful. "You're a legal co-owner. You have occupancy rights. This is your home, too." Lorraine's breath caught for a moment. Home. It hadn't felt like home in a long time. Maybe it never would again, but it was hers, legally. She had a right to be there, to fight for it. "Good," Arden said, her voice almost indifferent, as though this was something she had expected all along. She was already pulling out a new set of papers, the official eviction documents, the ones that carried weight, the ones that meant there was no going back. Let them think you're a guest. Let them get comfortable with that lie. Patrick pushed the papers toward Lorraine, his fingers still lingering on the corner of the document. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that moment, the understanding passed between them. This wasn't just a legal matter. This was personal. Lorraine took the eviction papers in her hands, turning them over slowly. Each page felt cold, sterile, detached. The words on the page were binding. They were final. There would be no second chances, no second thoughts. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the lines of text, the finality of it all sinking in. She had never imagined that things would come to this. It wasn't the kind of fight she had expected, but it was the one she had found herself in. "Everything's in order," Patrick said, his voice sharp but not unkind. "We'll file it once you're ready." Lorraine held the papers in her hands, her mind working in slow, measured movements. The cold weight of them was like a reminder, reminding her that there was no more hesitation, no more second-guessing. She wasn't just playing the role of a guest in her own life anymore. She was taking back what was hers. She glanced at Arden, whose expression was unreadable, before turning her attention back to Patrick. "When do we start?" she asked, her voice a little stronger than before. The tension that had settled in her chest was now something else, something colder. There was no turning back. Patrick gave a small nod, his fingers tapping against the table as he processed her words. "We start now." Lorraine looked down at the papers one more time, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat quicken. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about a piece of paper or legal rights. It was about something deeper, something that she had been ignoring for too long. It was about reclaiming control, about stepping back into a life that had slipped through her fingers like sand. The room felt smaller now, the air charged with the weight of what was to come. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't be easy, but it was time. Lorraine looked up again, meeting both their gazes with something new, a flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. "Then let's do it." Lorraine woke with the first light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the curtains. It was a quiet kind of morning, the kind that felt more like a whisper than a daybreak. For a moment, she simply lay there, her eyes tracing the dark lines of the room, the familiar, now almost oppressive, stillness of it. Her fingers itched. The papers from yesterday, the cold eviction notices, sat heavy in her bag. They had already done their job, the ink already permanent. But this, the moment of action, was hers to command. She had been awake long before the sun, moving like someone possessed. She stood up, the house as silent as the grave, and walked to the front door. Each step was deliberate, measured, as though she was stepping through the threshold of a different version of her life. The house, the people who still lived here, were now part of a past that felt too far gone to be repaired. In the cold light of morning, Lorraine took the first envelope from her bag and carefully affixed the eviction notice to the front door, the paper crisp and white against the dull wood. The words seemed to shimmer with finality as she stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. This was it, the end of the line. She took a slow breath and stepped away, knowing it was only a matter of time before someone would find it. She didn't have to wait long. Eric saw it first. He was coming out of the kitchen, his eyes blurry from sleep, when he froze at the sight of the notice. For a moment, it seemed as though the world had stopped around him. His breath hitched, his face pale as he took a few shaky steps toward the door. Is this real?" His voice was tight, panic already rising in his chest. Lorraine didn't flinch. She stood with her back to him, her eyes trained on the door. The house was eerily quiet again, as though even the walls were holding their breath. Eric stepped forward, his hands shaking as he reached for the envelope. He pulled it off the door, ripping it open with an almost frantic energy. As his eyes scanned the words, his face twisted into a mask of disbelief and horror. "You can't," his voice faltered. "You can't do this. Not like this." Lorraine's reply came cold, unyielding. "You signed it." The silence that followed felt too heavy, like the air had thickened with the weight of truth. But then Dana appeared, her presence like a storm breaking. She rushed into the room, her eyes wide with panic. "This is a mistake, right? You didn't mean to do this." Her voice cracked as she looked between Eric and Lorraine, the desperate edge in her tone making it clear that she was still clinging to a hope that didn't exist anymore. Lorraine turned, her eyes steady, unwavering. "You burned the photo," she said simply, her voice calm but firm. "Now I'm taking back the frame." Dana's face went pale, the words sinking in like cold water. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at Eric, but there was no answer there, only the silent acknowledgement that they had crossed a line that could never be undone. Eric, still holding the eviction notice, stared at Lorraine, a mix of anger and disbelief in his eyes. "You really think this is the answer?" he asked, his voice rising, a spark of frustration breaking through. "You're going to destroy everything over this? Over a damn photo?" Lorraine's expression hardened, her fingers clenching at her sides. "You're the one who burned it," she said, her tone sharp and final. "I'm just taking back what's mine." The words echoed in the room, the quiet between them pressing down like a heavy weight. Eric didn't respond, his mouth a thin line as he turned away. The sound of his footsteps receding was a kind of surrender, but it wasn't over. Upstairs, Lorraine could hear the soft sobs coming from Macy's room. Her heart clenched, and for a moment, the walls of the house felt even colder than before. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps quiet, and knocked gently on the door. "Macy?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. There was a moment of silence, and then the door cracked open. Macy's tear-streaked face looked up at her, the vulnerability in her eyes cutting through Lorraine like a blade. "Mom," Macy whispered, her voice small, fragile. Why are you doing this?" Lorraine's chest tightened. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, one she had written just before leaving her room that morning. She slipped it into Macy's hand, her fingers brushing lightly against her daughter's. "You're not to blame," Lorraine said softly, her voice breaking for the first time. "This isn't your fault." Macy's eyes flickered to the note, but she didn't speak. She just nodded, her lips trembling, before closing the door slowly. The finality of the sound was like the closing of a chapter. Lorraine stood there for a moment, her heart heavy, her resolve still firm. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew it was the only way. As she turned away and walked back toward the stairs, her mind raced, filled with images of everything that had led up to this moment. The fire, the photo, the house, and the way it had all burned down to this. She didn't know how much more she could take, but there was no going back. The phone rang twice before Dana picked up, her voice strained from the other end of the line, as though she'd been rehearsing what to say. She didn't waste any time on pleasantries. "Arden, we need to talk." "It's about Lorraine," Dana started, her voice tight, but her words rushed. "She's unstable. She's gone too far. This isn't just about the house anymore. She's trying to take everything from us. She's been playing us, making us feel sorry for her. But it's all a game, and we've been too blind to see it. She's got some twisted idea that she has control over everything. We need to stop her before it's too late." Arden's voice came through the phone, as smooth and unbothered as ever, cutting through the panic in Dana's tone with chilling precision. "Dinah," Arden began calmly, "you've forgotten something crucial. Lorraine isn't taking anything from anyone. She's enforcing her rights, and she has every right to do so. It's all there, in black and white." There was a brief pause. "You remember the signed deed and the breakdown of the $90K contribution, don't you?" Donna was quiet for a moment, the tension hanging between them like a thick fog. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable for Arden. She had long since learned to let the silence do its work. "I'm telling you, Arden," Dinah's voice cracked, her frustration rising. "She's manipulating us. She's using everything. She's even got Patrick involved now. She's pulling strings, making us look like we're the ones who don't understand, that we're the ones who are wrong. She's playing us, and she's winning." Arden's response was composed, her tone unwavering. "Manipulation doesn't apply here, Dana. Lorraine is enforcing a legal right. You both signed the paperwork. You've seen the breakdown. You can't claim manipulation when everything is above board. She's not the one in the wrong here." Dana's breath caught on the other end of the line, the air thick with the realization that there were no more arguments to be made. Arden had already factored everything into place. There was no room for negotiation, no way to talk her way out of it. "This is the law, Dana," Arden continued, almost with a touch of finality. "She's not breaking any rules. She's simply holding you to the agreements you signed." Donna's voice lowered, a dangerous edge creeping into it. "Then why does it feel like she's tearing us apart?" Another pause. "Because sometimes, Dana, Arden's voice softened but held firm. "The truth does that. It tears things apart, but it has to be done." Back at Lorraine's house, she was already anticipating what was coming. The weight of the decision hadn't fully settled until this point, until she felt the pressure of the legal battle starting to roll forward. Patrick had been swift in preparing the necessary paperwork. The formal motion for enforcement had been filed just the day before, sealing her position with ironclad legal backing. There was no turning back. Lorraine had taken the steps, and now the only thing left was to make sure it was carried through, no matter the cost. The house, once a place of family and fleeting joy, now felt like a fortress. Lorraine stood in the entryway, the cold morning light spilling over the doorstep as she stepped out to install the new doorbell camera. It wasn't a necessity, not in the way she had once imagined her life would be, but it felt right, like an added layer of protection. It wasn't just about capturing video anymore. It was about control. It was about taking back what had been hers, piece by piece. Her fingers worked quickly as she mounted the small camera beside the doorframe, clicking the final screw in place, making sure it was perfectly aligned. She couldn't afford to leave any room for doubt. Every interaction needed to be logged. Every word spoken, every gesture made. It all had to be documented. There could be no misunderstanding, no room for them to claim she was anything but in control of this situation. Lorraine stepped back, admiring the neatness of her work. The camera, now positioned to catch anyone who approached the door, was her silent ally. The crisp sound of the lens focusing felt strangely satisfying. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was preparing for what was coming next. That afternoon, Eric came, his face lined with exhaustion and frustration. He knocked on the door, a slight hesitation in his movement, as if he knew what was coming but hoped, prayed, that he was wrong. Lorraine opened the door, the soft creak of it echoing in the stillness between them. Eric didn't waste time on pleasantries. His eyes, usually so calm, were wild with a mixture of desperation and anger. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low, tight with emotion. "You're going to destroy everything." Lorraine didn't flinch. She stepped back, silently inviting him in. "You signed it, Eric." His eyes searched hers, looking for some sign of mercy, but found none. The house felt colder now, each room casting shadows that seemed to close in around them. He swallowed hard, taking a step forward, his voice thick with helplessness. "Please, Lorraine, reconsider. This isn't the way. You've already won. Why are you doing this? Why keep pushing?" Lorraine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out a photocopy of the signed clause, the one that gave her every right to do this. She slid it across the table to him, the paper crisp and impersonal. "Here's the truth, Eric. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking for you to agree with me. I'm just showing you what's been true from the start." Her voice remained steady, unwavering. "You signed it." Eric stared at the paper, his hands trembling as he looked between the claws in her face. The moment stretched between them, thick with unsaid words, and in the end, there was only the weight of that single document, a reminder of everything that had led them here. And just like that, Eric turned away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Lorraine in the silence of her own choices. The house felt colder than ever. Lorraine stood in the hallway, her breath steadying after the locksmith left. The secondary lock had been changed, securing the house in ways that felt more permanent than any lock ever could. It was the first of many steps, small but deliberate, in taking back what was hers. She wasn't going to let them erase her place, her part in this house, any longer. She moved through the house with a quiet determination, gathering her most valuable belongings: jewelry, photos, keepsakes, things that she had left behind for too long, things that had once meant something but now felt distant. She locked them away in a small safe, out of sight, but also out of reach. Her hands were steady, mechanical, as she secured each item. This wasn't about the things themselves. It was about control, about reclaiming her space. When the lock was changed, she didn't linger. She knew the next step was coming. She walked upstairs to Macy's room. Her daughter was still asleep, unaware of the changes Lorraine had already set in motion. "Macy!" Lorraine knocked softly on the door. Macy's tired eyes blinked up at her, confused. "Mom?" Lorraine stepped inside, sitting gently on the edge of Macy's bed. She didn't know how to begin, but there was no time to waste. "Macy, I need to tell you something. I helped buy this house. I just never took space. I let them think it was theirs, but it was always mine too." Macy blinked, the words not quite registering. "But why didn't you tell me?" Lorraine took a deep breath. "I thought it was easier. I thought it would keep the peace. But it wasn't about the house, Macy. It was about everything else. And now it's time to take it back. I've been patient for too long, and I can't keep pretending that I don't have a right to it." Macy's face softened, but confusion still clouded her eyes. "But why now? Why didn't you do this before?" "Because it's time," Lorraine said firmly. "And I'm not backing down anymore." That afternoon, Dana received the official court notice. The words were formal, cold, but they still hit like a punch. The eviction was confirmed. 30 days to vacate. It was happening. Her hands trembled as she read through the notice, her mind racing. She couldn't believe it. Lorraine had really done it, had really forced her hand. Dana picked up the phone quickly and dialed Arden, her voice shaking with frustration. "It's real, Arden. The court confirmed it. We have 30 days to leave." Arden's voice was calm on the other end, not shaken at all. "I'll take care of the rest. The paperwork's been filed. The eviction is legal." Dana squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't stop it. They were being forced out. Eric showed up later that afternoon, his steps slow, heavy. When Lorraine opened the door, he didn't speak at first, just stared at her, as if hoping for a different answer. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" His voice was strained, worn. "You're going to destroy everything." Lorraine didn't answer immediately. She stepped aside, silently inviting him in. She didn't need to say more. "You signed it," she said quietly, placing the photocopy of the signed clause on the table. "This is the truth, Eric. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just showing you what's always been there. You signed it." Eric stared at the paper for a long moment, his eyes wide with disbelief, before finally turning away. His shoulders sagged, and he walked out without another word. The next few days passed in a blur. Arden filed the necessary legal updates with the HOA, ensuring the title transfer protections were firmly in place. The paperwork was airtight now. Dana and Eric had no more room to maneuver. Lorraine stood in the living room, gazing out the window. The house was hers now. She had fought for it and won. But even as she felt the weight of her victory, she knew the battle had come with a price. She had taken back what was hers, but at what cost? The silence that filled the house was both comforting and suffocating. The place where she had once shared everything with them now felt distant, foreign. She had reclaimed her space, but the family she had fought for was slipping further and further away. Lorraine looked at the door, the echoes of past decisions reverberating in the stillness of the house. There was no going back now. Dana's frustration had reached a boiling point. Every attempt to challenge Lorraine had failed, leaving her with only one option in her mind: attack her health. She wasn't going to let Lorraine have the upper hand for much longer. If she could undermine Lorraine's mental state, maybe that would be the leverage she needed to gain control again. With a sharp breath, Dana dialed the number for Adult Protective Services. The conversation that followed was filled with veiled accusations. Insinuations that Lorraine wasn't fit to make decisions, that her choices were erratic, that her health was in question. Dana's voice, coded in false concern, twisted her narrative, leaving out the years of control she had exerted over Lorraine. But in Dana's eyes, this was the only way to regain her footing. The complaint was filed, and it didn't take long for the agency to respond. Lorraine's phone buzzed the next morning. An official-sounding voice introduced herself and asked if Lorraine was available for an interview. Her stomach sank, but she refused to let panic rise. This wasn't about truth. It was about taking back her space. She could handle this. The interview was scheduled for later that week. Lorraine sat alone in her living room, eyes focused on the clock as it ticked down the minutes. The knock at the door was firm and urgent, the type of knock that signaled no room for hesitation. When she opened the door, a woman in her mid-30s stood there, clipboard in hand. Her demeanor was polite, yet professional. "Mrs. Harding?" the woman asked. "Yes," Lorraine replied, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of anxiety. She stepped aside to let the woman in. The conversation began slowly, the social worker carefully explaining her role, asking open-ended questions about Lorraine's life, her routines, her relationships. At first, it felt like an interrogation, but Lorraine remained calm, her voice unwavering as she answered each question thoroughly, with clarity. She spoke of her plans, her independence, the way she had rebuilt her life after everything had fallen apart. "I'm in full control of my life," Lorraine stated firmly. "I have my own doctor, I take my medications as prescribed, and I'm capable of making my own decisions." The social worker scribbled notes on her clipboard, then asked about Lorraine's health. She asked about recent checkups, her cognitive function, whether she had experienced any mental lapses. Lorraine didn't flinch. She was ready for this. "I'm in good health," Lorraine continued. "My doctor can verify that. I don't have any issues with my memory or decision-making." As the interview wound down, the woman gave her a courteous nod, then left, assuring Lorraine that she would follow up with the results of the investigation soon. Lorraine closed the door behind her, but her mind kept racing. This was just another obstacle, another test, and she had passed. Lorraine had barely settled back into the quiet of the house when the phone rang again. This time, it was her doctor. "Mrs. Harding, I've received a call regarding an APS investigation." Her doctor's voice was calm but firm. "I'm sending over a statement immediately, confirming that you are fully capable of making your own decisions and that there's no cognitive impairment present. You've been my patient for years, and I know you are in excellent health." Lorraine exhaled slowly, a small but significant relief washing over her. With the doctor's statement in hand, she felt a little more confident, but she still knew the fight wasn't over. Dana wouldn't stop here. Days later, Arden called Lorraine with an update. "The complaint has been closed. APS flagged Dana's file. They found no evidence of impairment and are treating her report as baseless," she explained, her tone pleased but measured. "She's going to have to answer for this." Lorraine allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. The case had been dismissed, but she knew Dana would try something else. "Good," Lorraine said, her voice steady. "What's next?" Arden hesitated for just a moment. "We're documenting everything. If she tries anything again, we file for a restraining order." "You don't need to put up with this. You've done nothing wrong." The following morning, Patrick called Lorraine. His voice was sharp, businesslike. "Lorraine, you've got to understand," he said, his words clipped. "We need to go after her legally. If she tries something like this again, we're moving for a restraining order. This is harassment." Lorraine held the phone tightly to her ear. "I'm not letting her get away with it. This is my life, my space. She's not taking that from me." "I'll get the paperwork ready," Patrick confirmed, his tone hardening. "This is over." As the days stretched on, the sense of finality Lorraine had been hoping for seemed just out of reach. Every victory, no matter how small, was met with a new challenge. Dana's actions had been reckless, but Lorraine knew there was more to come. The battle wasn't just over what was legal, it was about power, control, and keeping her place in the life she had built. But with each passing day, Lorraine's resolve only grew stronger. No one was going to take that from her. The silence in the house felt like a new kind of freedom. Lorraine stood in the kitchen, the bouquet of flowers still fresh in her hands, their vibrant petals a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Dana and Eric had sent them, an offering of supposed peace, but Lorraine knew better. The flowers were an attempt to erase the past, to smooth over the damage they had caused. But Lorraine wasn't ready to forgive, and she wasn't willing to forget. With a steady breath, she walked to the door, the bouquet heavy in her grip. The sunlight outside was harsh against her skin, but she didn't flinch. She had made her choice. She had no room for kindness that wasn't earned. Her footsteps were firm as she walked toward Dana and Eric's house. Each step felt like a final act of defiance. The flowers, once an offering, were now a weapon. She had no intention of letting them go without consequence. When she arrived, she paused at the door, the bouquet in one hand and a printed copy of the signed clause in the other. The timeline, everything that had been laid out, the truth of it all, was there, in black and white. She wasn't going to let them forget it. Dana answered the door, a strained smile on her face. Her eyes flickered to the flowers, then back to Lorraine. Lorraine didn't say a word at first. She held out the bouquet, her face unreadable. Donna's smile faltered as she took them, unsure of what was coming next. "I'm returning these," Lorraine said, her voice calm, yet carrying a weight that made Dana pause. "They don't change anything. They don't erase the past." She handed over the printed copy of the clause and the timeline, watching as Dana's face tightened. "I forgive nothing," Lorraine continued, her voice sharp now, "and I forget nothing." Dana's hands trembled slightly as she held the documents. She opened her mouth to speak, but Lorraine didn't give her the chance. "I don't need your apologies," Lorraine added, turning toward the door. "Just stay out of my way." As Lorraine turned to leave, she noticed Macy watching from the stairs, her small form barely visible in the shadow. Lorraine's heart twinged as their eyes met. Macy's gaze wide and uncertain, as though she were witnessing something much bigger than herself. Lorraine gave her daughter a small, steady nod. Macy said nothing, but the look on her face told Lorraine everything she needed to know. That evening, Lorraine sat with Patrick in his office, the weight of the decisions they had made settling over her. They were updating her will, removing Dana and Eric entirely. "I've given them everything they're going to get," Lorraine said, her voice steady as Patrick typed the new instructions into the document. "There's no room for them in this life anymore. They've had their chance." Patrick glanced up from the paperwork, his expression unreadable. "Understood." When the paperwork was complete, Lorraine stood, the sense of finality heavy on her chest. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. As she left the office, Lorraine walked past the flowers that had been returned. They were now tucked neatly in a vase on the kitchen table, their bright colors fading, a symbol of everything that had slipped away. She picked up the bouquet and walked to the hospice center nearby. The flowers wouldn't go to waste. They would go where they were needed, where they would bring light, not false promises. As she handed them over, she knew she was making the right choice. She walked away, her back straight. A weight lifted, but a new burden settling in its place. The knock on the door was sharp, urgent. Lorraine opened it to find Dana's lawyer standing on her porch, a stack of papers in hand, the dark suit a stark contrast to the warmth of the sun outside. "Mrs. Harding," the lawyer said, his voice professional but laced with an unspoken challenge, "we'd like to request mediation. Dana believes this situation could be resolved with proper discussion." Lorraine didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, her eyes cool, assessing. The words proper discussion rang hollow in her mind. There had been enough talking. "Not interested," she replied flatly, but he was already holding out the papers for her to take. "The court has ordered mediation. It's the next step. You'll need to be present," he said, his tone no longer as smooth as it had been moments before. Lorraine didn't move for a moment, then stepped aside to take the papers, the rustling of the documents feeling louder than it should. Her fingers brushed against the cold edges of the official paperwork. When Lorraine arrived at the mediation office the next day, Dana and Eric were already there. Their eyes flicked to her as she entered, but there was no warmth, no attempt at reconciliation, just the silent understanding that this was the final round. Arden was beside her, calm as always, the sharp edge of her professionalism cutting through the tension. The mediator, a man in his 50s, glanced over the paperwork, then looked up at the parties gathered around the table. "This should be simple," he said, pushing the papers toward Lorraine. "But before we begin, I want to make sure we have a clear understanding." Lorraine set the papers down with a soft thud. Arden immediately took the title clause and laid it out for everyone to see. Airtight, witnessed, notarized. "This," Arden said, tapping the clause with a finger, "is what we'll be working with. It's signed, witnessed, and legal. No room for interpretation." The lawyer for Dana shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he glanced at the title clause. It was clear he hadn't expected this level of preparation. The mediator picked up the documents but didn't need to say anything further. Minutes into the mediation, it was already clear that there was nothing left to discuss. Dana's lawyer fumbled over arguments, trying to find cracks where none existed. The mediator called for a brief recess, but when they returned, the battle was already lost. Mediation ended in 12 minutes. Lorraine felt no triumph in the speed of the defeat, only a deep, cold certainty that this was the last time they'd challenge her. Back in the hallway, she filed a motion to expedite their removal from the property. This was it. There was no more room for negotiation. Later that evening, Eric arrived at the house, his face pale and strained. He stood at the door, his hands shaking slightly as he looked at Lorraine. "I never wanted to hurt you," Eric said, his voice broken. "None of this was supposed to happen. We didn't mean it." Lorraine's eyes hardened. She'd heard enough of their excuses. "You meant to outlive me," she replied, her voice low but razor-sharp. "That's worse." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Eric opened his mouth to say something else but stopped himself, unable to find the right words. Lorraine shut the door softly, the sound of it echoing in the emptiness. As she leaned against the door, a sense of finality washed over her. It wasn't over yet, but she had won this battle, and the war was just beginning. The courtroom was cold, the air thick with the weight of 100 silent eyes. Lorraine sat calmly at the front, her fingers resting lightly on the stack of documents before her. She didn't need to look at them. She had memorized every word, every figure, every page. Today was the day she would lay it all out. Dana's attempts to discredit her, to undermine her right to what was hers, were over. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, surveyed the room with a practiced glance. She'd seen cases like this before. Familial disputes that turned bitter, ugly, and personal. But this one felt different. There was an air of finality hanging between them, a sense that everything would come to a head here. "Ms. Harding," the judge began, her voice steady, "please proceed with your evidence." Lorraine nodded, her eyes meeting Dana's for just a second. Dana was sitting at the other side, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear, trying to reassure her. But Lorraine could see it, the fear, the uncertainty. It was too late for them now. Lorraine stood up, her movements deliberate, measured. She opened the folder and began pulling out the documents, laying them out on the table one by one. Bank transfers, gift letters, the original deed. Everything was here, airtight, notarized. She didn't say a word as she handed the documents over to the judge. Donna's lawyer shot a quick glance at the papers, then turned to Dana. His face tightened as he saw the weight of the evidence presented against them. Lorraine didn't care about their reaction. She was only concerned with the truth. Dana, however, couldn't remain silent. She shifted in her seat, her face flushed. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking, "my mother's mental state has been in decline for months. I'm concerned she's not capable of making sound decisions." The judge nodded but didn't look convinced. "I've reviewed the medical affidavits, Ms. Harding. We'll proceed with that consideration, but I need to hear more." Lorraine met Dana's eyes again, her expression unreadable. Dana had resorted to the same tactic, questioning her mental capacity, trying to paint her as unstable. But Lorraine wasn't here to argue her mental state. She was here to expose the truth. Arden, who had been quietly sitting by Lorraine's side, stood up and walked to the judge, handing over her own set of papers. She began reading aloud excerpts from their texts and emails, Dana and Eric's resentful, entitled messages, the ones that spoke of the house, of control, of their plan to take it all from Lorraine without remorse. The courtroom was silent as Arden's voice echoed through the room, each word a blow to Dana's defense. There was no denying what they had said, the cruelty and the entitlement in their words. Lorraine remained still, her face impassive, as she pulled out the final piece of evidence, the photo of the burned picture. She held it up for the judge to see. The fire had taken a piece of her past, but today she was taking back everything. "This is what they did," Lorraine said softly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "This is the history they tried to erase." The judge took in the photo, her gaze lingering on the burned edges. She nodded slowly, then turned her attention back to the court. "I've heard enough," she said. "The eviction stands. Ms. Harding's rights are upheld. No appeal will be considered without penalty." A cold weight lifted off Lorraine's shoulders, but she didn't feel relief, only a steady, unyielding sense of justice. From the gallery, Lorraine caught Macy's eye. The girl's lips moved silently, and Lorraine's heart caught in her throat as Macy mouthed the words, "Thank you." Lorraine nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. It wasn't over yet, but this battle, at least, was won. The sun was barely up when Lorraine walked into the community center for her first painting class. She had never painted before, not seriously. But today something in her had shifted. A quiet need to create, to build something new. The old life, the one she had fought so hard to reclaim, still felt too fresh, too raw. She needed a way to move forward, to fill the emptiness left in the wake of everything that had happened. The teacher greeted her warmly as she entered, an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Lorraine nodded in response, then found her seat at the easel, a blank canvas waiting for her. As the class began, she took the brush in hand, unsure of what to expect, but feeling something inside her stir. The first stroke was hesitant, but then another followed, then another. Slowly, as she painted, a kind of peace began to settle over her. It wasn't about the outcome. It was about the act of doing, of expressing herself in a way that didn't require words, didn't require any justification. Later that week, Lorraine found herself going through the house, deciding what else she could part with. The furniture had been rearranged in ways that made the space feel different, but there was still too much. She had no need for the excess, not when there were people out there who could use it more. She called a few transitional housing groups and arranged for them to take what she no longer needed. Couches, chairs, tables, things that had once been part of her life with Dana and Eric, now serving a different purpose. It felt like shedding old skin, a small but significant step in creating a life that was truly her own. On Saturday mornings, Lorraine started hosting coffee at her house. It wasn't much, just a few neighbors, a couple of cups of coffee, and light conversation. But it was a start. She wasn't ready to open up completely, but she could offer companionship, a sense of belonging. The mornings were easy, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Slowly, the people who came, the quiet exchanges over steaming mugs, became the rhythm of her new life. One Saturday, after the coffee had ended and the house was quiet again, Lorraine found a note slipped under her door. It was from Macy. "I still want to visit." Lorraine's heart ached as she read the simple words. She stood there for a moment, staring at the note, unsure of how to respond. The space between them had been so wide, so painfully wide. But Macy was reaching out, and that meant something. Lorraine smiled softly, walked to her desk, and pulled out a small key. She tied it to a string and left it at the door where Macy had left her note, the string hanging low for Macy to find. She then wrote a simple note to go with it. anytime. Days passed, and Lorraine began to settle into her new routine, finding peace in the small acts of living, but it didn't last long. One afternoon, as she was walking through the neighborhood, she overheard a conversation in the local group chat, where Dana had been bad-mouthing her to anyone who would listen. She thinks she can just take everything, Donna's message read. She doesn't deserve it. She's unstable. People in this neighborhood shouldn't be letting her get away with it. Lorraine's stomach turned, but she didn't let it show. She had expected this, but hearing the words out loud made something inside her snap. She had spent so long fighting for everything she had, and now Dana was trying to tear it all down again. Lorraine stood there for a long moment, staring at her phone screen, but instead of responding, instead of engaging, she set the phone down and walked into her house, the silence swallowing her whole. It was time to focus on what mattered, what she had built, what she could build, and the people who truly mattered. Everything else was just noise. Lorraine sat quietly at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face. Dana had been relentless, her posts on the neighborhood group chat filled with venom, unstable, delusional, taking what wasn't hers. Each accusation was a sharp needle in the side of the life Lorraine was trying to build. But this time, Lorraine wasn't going to let the words slide past her without a response. She knew exactly what she needed to do. With a steady hand, Lorraine took screenshots of every post Dana made, capturing the lies and the manipulation in pixelated clarity. Each click felt like a small victory. The control was shifting. Dana had hoped to turn the neighborhood against her, but Lorraine was done being the silent victim. She would expose every falsehood, one by one. Once the evidence was gathered, Lorraine called Arden, her voice quiet but firm. "It's time," she said, the weight of the decision clear in her tone. "Send the cease and desist. Enough is enough." Arden's response was immediate. "I'll get it out today, defamation warning included." Lorraine knew it wouldn't end there. Dana had crossed a line, but she wouldn't stop without more pushback. She called Patrick, her lawyer, and described the situation. He listened, then responded with practiced calm. "I'll file the restraining order request if this continues. We'll put a stop to it, legally, once and for all." Lorraine felt the satisfaction of having all the pieces in place, but there was no time to rest. The storm wasn't over yet. The following morning, Lorraine sat at her desk and typed up a single post for the neighborhood group chat. The keyboard clicked beneath her fingers, each word deliberate. When it was done, she didn't hesitate. She clicked post, then sat back to watch. It wasn't long before the first few responses started to appear, but Lorraine didn't look at them. She was too focused on the one thing she knew would silence the lies. She posted a scan of the court ruling, the one that had declared the eviction final. Below it, she added one simple line. "They burned my photo. I burned their claim." The words felt like a weight lifting from her chest. There was no more room for their narrative, no space left for their lies to grow unchecked. This was her truth, set in stone. The reactions from the neighbors were swift. Some liked her post. Others remained silent, unwilling to engage with the drama that had been unfolding for too long. Donna's posts grew quieter, less frequent. The neighbors had seen enough. They weren't interested in getting involved in Dana's chaos anymore. Lorraine checked the group chat later that afternoon. The usual tirade from Donna had stopped. The comments section was filled with people, but no one was responding to her. The air had shifted, and Lorraine felt the slightest relief. The power had returned to her hands, but there was more to come. That evening, as Lorraine cleaned up after dinner, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find a small package on the step. It was from Macy. Lorraine hesitated, then slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a simple card, folded neatly with Macy's handwriting on the front. "Happy birthday, Mom. I still think of you." Lorraine's heart clenched as she read the words, each one a painful reminder of how far apart they had been. But the card wasn't just a gesture. It was Macy's way of reaching out, And that meant something. Lorraine sat down on the floor, holding the card in her hands. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. The tears had been rare, almost non-existent lately, but this meant everything. She took a deep breath and walked over to her desk. Picking up a small key, she tied it to a string and placed it in an envelope. It wasn't much, but it was all she could give for now. Her note was simple, just one line. "Anytime, Macy." She placed the card and key in the envelope, sealed it, and walked out the door, hand-delivering it to Macy's doorstep, just as she had once done for her. As Lorraine turned to leave, a sense of quiet strength filled her. The war wasn't over, but today she had reclaimed a piece of what mattered most. Lorraine moved through the house slowly, each step echoing in the silence that had settled in every corner. The absence of voices, the absence of noise, had become familiar now, but it still felt strange. The house had been full once, full of arguments, of laughter, of people who had once been family. Now it was only hers. The walls seemed to stretch, offering space that felt both lonely and liberating at the same time. She walked down the hallway, her fingers grazing the cool walls as she passed. The house was empty, but it was hers. There was a peace in the stillness, one she had longed for but had never thought she could have again. She reached the front door and, without a moment's hesitation, pulled out the new locks from her bag. This time, the change felt final. It was more than a physical change. It was symbolic. She was locking out the past, locking out the people who had tried to take everything from her. With each turn of the key, Lorraine felt the house becoming more hers, the ownership solidifying in a way that went beyond paperwork and court rulings. The locks clicked into place, and Lorraine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She stood there for a moment, staring at the door, the quiet hum of satisfaction filling her. Later, Lorraine found herself kneeling in front of the fireplace. The hearth was cold, the remnants of old fires long gone. She slipped on the gloves, the act grounding her, reminding her of how far she had come. She ran the vacuum over the ashes, sucking up the remnants of things that had burned, of things that had been lost. Each sweep of the vacuum was an act of cleansing, of reclaiming the space that was once filled with the ghosts of her past. There was dignity in this moment, cleaning up after the fire, after everything that had been taken from her. This house, this life, was hers again. She wasn't afraid of the work it took to make it hers. It felt good. It felt right. As she finished cleaning, Lorraine sat back on her heels and gazed at the hearth. Her hand brushed over the empty mantle, and for the first time in a long while, she noticed something small, a toy, half buried under the couch, a forgotten relic from Macy's childhood. A small bear, its fur faded but still recognizable. It had been left behind, abandoned like so many things had been. Lorraine picked it up gently, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. She didn't know why she kept it, but she tucked it into her pocket as a quiet reminder of the daughter who was still there, still reaching out. The fire in the hearth was next. Lorraine struck the match and held it to the kindling, watching as the flame took hold, crackling as it grew. For the first time, the fire felt warm. The flames danced with life, and Lorraine sat back, watching as the light filled the room, casting shadows on the walls. It wasn't just about the warmth of the fire. It was the warmth of the space itself, a space she had finally reclaimed. She allowed herself to relax, her shoulders dropping for the first time in what felt like forever. This was her home again. She was here, and she had the right to be. With the fire crackling, Lorraine moved to the wall and picked up the photo she had set aside earlier. A photo of her, alone but smiling, standing proudly in front of the house. It was simple, yet it meant everything. She had taken it herself. The lens focused on her and the house she had fought for. There was no one else in the frame, no distractions, just her. Lorraine hung the photo on the wall, right above the fireplace. It was the first picture in this house that felt like it belonged, like it was a part of her journey forward. As she stepped back to look at it, she realized something profound. This was the first time she had truly felt at home here. And just like that, everything changed. The house was hers, the past was sealed, and the future, though uncertain, was wide open. But no matter what came next, Lorraine was ready. She had reclaimed her life. Lorraine sat at the desk, the legal papers before her. The words on the document felt like a new beginning, a new foundation built on what she had already reclaimed. She had been through so much, fought so hard, and now it was finally official. The house was hers in every sense of the word. She signed the title ownership papers with a steady hand, her signature deliberate, solidifying her place. There was no question now, no more doubts. The deed was hers, her name the only one written on it. Patrick had been meticulous, ensuring every legal document was perfect, every clause ironclad. The finality of it all settled over her like a quiet storm, and for once she felt at peace. Once the paperwork was filed, Lorraine turned to the next part of her life. Her will needed updating. It was time for her legacy to take shape. With Patrick's help, she carefully added provisions. The house would go to Macy, no one else. And there would be clauses for Macy's education. Everything that had been denied to her, now being insured for the future. Lorraine's legacy would be built on her daughter's success, not her pain. The next morning, Lorraine stood in her kitchen, a vase in hand, adding a fresh bouquet of flowers. She looked down at the arrangement, thinking of Arden. She had been there for her every step of the way, guiding her through the legal battles, helping her reclaim her life. Lorraine never thought she would need anyone again, but Arden had shown her the power of having someone by your side. She picked up her phone and typed a simple message. "Thanks for teaching me fire can cleanse." She attached a photo of the flowers and hit send. Arden's response was swift. "You did all the work. I'm just glad I could help." Lorraine wasn't done yet. There was something more to be done, something that connected her to the community she had been pushed out of. She had lived in the neighborhood for years, but had always felt like an outsider. Now she was ready to step back in, on her own terms. She joined a property rights panel at the local library. Ready to share her story, she wasn't doing this for recognition. She was doing it for herself, for the other people out there who felt like they had no voice. Her experience, her fight, it could help others. That Saturday after the meeting, Lorraine walked to the backyard, feeling a deep sense of peace. She placed a new garden sign at the edge of the yard, where the sun hit just right. It read, "Photo of the Day." The sign was small but meaningful, an invitation to the world to see what she saw, a place that had once been broken but was now whole again. She picked up her camera, snapping a photo of the house bathed in golden light. It was a photo of triumph, of reclaiming what had been lost. As she looked through the viewfinder, a feeling of deep satisfaction settled in her chest. This was her life now, authored by her, lived by her, and the future stretched out before her, full of possibility. Lorraine opened the door, and there she was, Macy, standing on the other side, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket, her gaze hesitant but hopeful. It had been weeks since their last real conversation, and the air between them had always felt thick, charged. But now it was different. Macy had come. Lorraine stepped forward before she could think, and pulled Macy into her arms. The hug was long, tighter than either of them expected, wordless in its depth. It wasn't just a greeting, it was a bridge. Everything they'd been through, all the pain, the misunderstandings, the silence, they melted into the warmth of this simple embrace. Macy's breath was soft against Lorraine's shoulder, and for the first time in so long, Lorraine felt the weight of her love for her daughter fill the space around them. They pulled apart slowly, both holding on for just a moment longer than necessary. Macy smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes, not fully. "I'm glad you're here," Lorraine said softly, the words carrying a weight that wasn't there before. "Me too," Macy replied, her voice low. The kitchen was warm, filled with the comforting scent of muffins baking in the oven. It was a simple thing, baking together, but for Lorraine, it felt like reclaiming a part of her life that had been lost. She pulled out the ingredients with practiced ease, the rhythm of the task familiar, grounding. They worked side by side, the sound of mixing batter and the soft clinking of utensils filling the space between them. Lorraine looked at Macy as she stirred, her daughter's brow furrowed in concentration, her movements gentle, almost tentative. It wasn't the same as it had been when they were younger, when they used to bake together every weekend, laughter echoing through the house, but it was close. As Lorraine put the muffins into the oven, she turned to Macy, her heart full. "You're the only one who sees me," Macy said suddenly, her voice soft but piercing. Lorraine blinked, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to understand. "I mean, you're the only one who doesn't treat me like I'm some part of the past. You don't make me feel like I'm just a thing that's broken." Macy's voice faltered as she spoke, and Lorraine could hear the vulnerability in her words. "Everyone else, they want me to be something I'm not. But you see me, really see me." Lorraine's chest tightened, but she didn't look away. She walked over to Macy and cupped her face gently. "Because I refuse to vanish," Lorraine replied softly, the words heavy with all the unspoken years between them. "I won't ever make you feel invisible. Not again." Macy's eyes softened, the quiet understanding between them growing. They didn't need to say more. After the muffins were done and cooling on the counter, Lorraine suggested they paint a frame. It felt like the next step, something symbolic, something they could share. They sat at the kitchen table, paint spread out before them, brushes ready. Lorraine picked up the frame, feeling its weight in her hands. It was simple, unfinished, like the space between them, a blank canvas waiting for something new. Macy picked up a brush, her fingers stained with color as she began to paint. Slowly at first, then with more confidence. Lorraine followed her lead, working beside her. The frame took shape, each stroke becoming a mark on their relationship, a new foundation being built. They didn't speak much while they painted, but the air between them was filled with something different, a sense of mutual understanding, of healing. As the frame dried, they stepped back to look at it. It was no masterpiece, but it was theirs. It was new. The sound of laughter filled the kitchen, unguarded and genuine. The first real laughter in this house in so long. It was the kind of laughter that echoed with joy, the kind that felt like an opening, a door being pushed back to let in the light. For the first time in ages, Lorraine knew it wasn't just the house that was healing. It was them, together. She looked at Macy, her daughter standing by her side, and knew that no matter what came next, they had both found something worth fighting for. Lorraine sat at her desk, the weight of the legal files in front of her a reminder of everything she had fought for. The pages were crisp, filled with contracts, affidavits, motions, and rulings, each one marking a battle, each one a testament to her fight for what was rightfully hers. Yet in this moment, they didn't feel like victories. They felt like relics, a chapter of her life that was finally closed. With a deep breath, Lorraine picked up the stack and walked to the door. The air was cool outside, a steady wind rustling the leaves on the trees. She didn't hesitate as she made her way to the car, the legal files heavy in her hands. She drove to the local elder rights group, the same group that had given her the support and knowledge she needed when things had seemed darkest. She handed over the files, her final act of releasing the past, of letting go of what no longer served her. "Thank you," Lorraine said quietly to the coordinator as she passed over the documents. "I don't need these anymore." The coordinator nodded, understanding the weight of the gesture. Lorraine turned and walked out of the office, feeling lighter with every step. The past was now truly behind her, a thing of papers and legalese, of courtrooms and battles won. She had done what she needed to do, and now she was ready for something else. Lorraine walked her neighborhood the next morning, the sun shining down, the streets quieter than they used to be. It was a familiar sight, but one she had never really owned. Now, as she walked, people nodded to her, neighbors who had once turned their backs now acknowledging her presence with a subtle respect. She was no longer the shadow of someone else's life. She was her own person, her own force. People smiled, said hello. She smiled back. She was no longer invisible in this place. She was Lorraine Harding, the woman who had fought, not just for a house, but for a sense of belonging. The walk felt like a victory lap, but one with no need for fanfare. The change had been slow and quiet, but it was real. She was known. She was respected. She belonged here, and nothing could take that away. That evening, Lorraine stood in front of the hearth once more. The house was quiet. The only sound the soft crackle of the firewood she had just placed in the fireplace. Macy stood beside her, her eyes watching the flames, her expression thoughtful. Lorraine took a deep breath and struck a match, holding it to the kindling. The flames ignited quickly, growing stronger with each second. She placed the last piece of wood on the fire and stepped back. The warmth of the fire spread through the room, chasing away the lingering chill. "This is how it should feel," Lorraine said softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "Safe, controlled." Macy nodded, her hand brushing over the frame they had painted together earlier. Lorraine moved to the mantel, carefully placing the photo in the new frame, a picture of her standing proudly in front of the house. It was simple, but it represented everything she had fought for, everything she had rebuilt. She stepped back, looking at the framed photo, then at the fire. It felt right. It felt like home. The firelight flickered, casting soft shadows on the walls. Lorraine stood there, staring at the flames, her heart no longer heavy with anger. It wasn't about the fight anymore. It wasn't about what Donna or anyone else had tried to do. It was about the peace she had finally found. No longer angry, Lorraine felt something deeper settle within her. She was done fighting. She had won. Later that night, sitting at her desk, she opened her journal. The pages were filled with the journey of everything she had been through. But tonight, she wrote the final line. "They burned my photo to erase me." She paused, her pen hovering over the page, before adding the final words. "So I erased them instead, with an eviction notice and a signature." Lorraine closed the journal, the weight of her past now sealed within its pages. She stood, walking to the fireplace and looking at the photo of herself, her smile wide and full of pride. She had reclaimed her life, and with it, everything that mattered. The fire she had started was now the fire she controlled, and nothing could extinguish it.